You know, everybody in the world feels like a nobody going nowhere at some time in your life. Some people have some experiences that are very, very painful, and it's more acute for them, but we all get stuck at times. Sometimes, you drive in your car, and your car seems to know its own way home or its own way to work, and you don't really have to concentrate, you don't really have to think, and your mind begins to wander, and you start thinking like, man, this is not where I thought I was going to be in this job. This is not, we're into this marriage like 16, 18 years. This is not my expectations. I feel like I'm on this treadmill, and where I thought I would be, what I thought my life would be like. And then you just start asking questions like, does my life really matter? Am I going to be single all the rest of my life? I mean, I thought by now I would own a home. I thought by now I would really be here in my career, and I'm here. And then, some circumstances happen, and this is just normal, and it's human, and we go to these dark times now and then, and for some of you, it's more than now and then. If I was gone, probably no one would ever miss me. I mean, maybe a few family members, maybe for a couple weeks. And then you just sort of go down these dark trails, and something inside of you and inside of me desperately wants to be a somebody. We're made to be a somebody. And like what you just watched on the video, we usually will figure out some way to try and make ourselves a somebody. And whether it's by performance or art or music or intelligence or relationships, or sometimes we go to really not healthy places like an eating disorder or an addiction, but something to fill that void. And that happens to everybody in little windows, and for some people, for big windows. The other time it happens isn't just when you're stuck. The other time it happens is when you you sort of hit the bullseye or you strike it rich. And I carry around an article that many years ago, it was a 1999 Santa Cruz Mercury article, and I mean, literally, I have it still on paper. And it's an article, the names of these 20-something and early 30 entrepreneurs who hit it. The article says, almost weekly in the Silicon Valley, 20-somethings sell their companies and make a few $100 million, rich beyond their wildest dreams. Yet despite their wealth, they're likely to face a universal conundrum. Humans are wired to strive for goals, but reaching them can be disorienting. Therapists see successful young entrepreneurs asking themselves soul-searching questions, some for the first time, about what they're doing with their lives. They experience, and then quotation marks, the void. And then it talks about a lady who is a psychotherapist in the Silicon Valley who sits and talks to people that have, quote, everything and feel like a nobody going nowhere because they thought that if I ever did that, well then. And for reasons I don't know, just in the last probably 15 years, God has orchestrated my life in some places around the world where I just end up sitting down with a lot of people like that. And what I would tell you is, see, they don't have this false hope that if someday, some way I could do this, then I'll be a somebody going somewhere. They've kind of hit it. And some of the wealthiest, richest, most powerful people, former professional athletes, people that own amazing companies, people that have a house here, another house here, a G4, a G5, I've sat across from in the last 15 years, and they just begin in a safe place to tell me, I feel like a nobody, going nowhere. And everybody wants to be me, but if they only knew. I've had a few seasons like that, but the most difficult one for me was a season between 1988 and 1990. I'd made a 5-year commitment. It was the very first time I was a pastor, and it was a journey. We start out with these 35 people, and I made a 5-year commitment, so about 6 years in, about 400, 500 people begin to come to this little church in this town of 3,000, and I love them and they love me. But I went to seminary, I went to graduate school, then I went to seminary, and I wanted to be a missionary. And then God said, no, you can't be a missionary, but you get to be a pastor. And so I'm in year number 6 of a 5-year commitment. You do the math. Now, I grew up in the suburbs, right? So I'm in this town, they didn't have a stoplight. They only had 2 restaurants, no fast food places. This is like pickup trucks with guns in the back. And I got to where, they really helped me. I really loved them, but it was like, okay, those are the training wheels. I'm ready, God. Year 6, year 7, year 8. And those last 2.5 years, I remember driving around sort of mindlessly going, are you kidding me? I went to 2 years of graduate school and 5 years of seminary, and I'm in a town of 3,000 people, and God's forgot my name? This is it? This is like, are you kidding? And then I would get really discouraged, and I would think, what about all those dreams I thought you put in my heart? Did I really hear you? Is it just me? Is there something wrong with me? My life was here, and my dreams and expectations were here, and the gap was like, there's no way. And I remember just driving around, and some of us that are sort of highly focused and probably dysfunctional, I remember I started counting all the churches within a mile or a mile and a half. There were 16 churches within like a half a mile to a mile and a half. And I thought, God, if these people want to hear about you, this is Texas. There's churches everywhere. I want to go where it's cutting edge. I've been overseas. I want to go where, and it was just nothing. I felt like a nobody going nowhere. Question for you. When's the last time you felt that way? And what do you do? See, the problem is that we think it's about our circumstances. I'm going to suggest it's primarily an issue of perspective. If you'll look on the very front of your notes, I'm going to tell you a very brief, true story. And I put it here because God used this unusual experience to help me sort of come out of my poor me, I'm a nobody, I'm going nowhere, my life doesn't count. If I died tomorrow, no one would care. Personal pity party. And it was about that time we lived in Texas, and my oldest boys were only 10 or 11, so it was many, many years ago. And we heard this huge dog barking, growling and barking, and then we heard this patter right to our house, and then we heard this, let me in, let me in, let me in. And it was a winter night, only about 7 o'clock, but pitch dark. And so it sounded like Michael, one of my kids' friends. And so I get to the door, and it's like, this kid's going to die. I open the door, and I flip on the light, and Michael's there, and his eyes are dilated, and help me, help me, help me. There's this dog, can I come inside? So he jumps inside. I'd flipped on the porch light, and then we looked behind Michael. And so help me, I don't know if this dog had like really big lungs, but I'm telling you, that dog might have been this big, and maybe this long. And this kid's going, thank you so much, thank you so much. And then we all turn around and we look at this ferocious, Doberman pincer, except it's not. It's like a Chihuahua with lungs. And we just all start laughing. We crack up. Look at the bottom of your notes, however. A ferocious bark, a pounding door, a terrified child, a little light, and a timeless principle. Our perceptions determine our responses. If you perceive yourself to be a nobody going nowhere, it doesn't matter what's really true of you. Ask Robin Williams. Think of that. Was he a nobody? And yet, at a moment in time, in a window of time, like all of us, when you get discouraged or depressed, you lose perspective, you start looking at life like this, and pretty soon your marriage isn't any good, your life isn't any good, your life doesn't. People who commit suicide, the great majority of them, are really balanced people who allow their perspective to shift. They get very discouraged, often get clinically depressed, and pretty soon all they can see is the dark. And it's not that their life is meaningless. It's not that they don't bring something to the table. It's not that they're not successful. but their view of themselves, their perception determines their response. And we're going to look at 5 specific things that we need to remember from God's Word that literally is going to do this for you. Flick on the porch light of truth into your soul so that on those moments when you feel like a nobody going nowhere, or in today when you feel that way, it'll give you perspective. And you might even be able to kind of laugh and say, wow, what was I thinking? My life has value, it has purpose, it has direction. I'm really a somebody, not because of what other people think or what I think, but because of what God thinks and who He made. You ready to dig in? 5 things to remember. The first thing to remember is God knows you. He knows you. This is written by David. He says, "Oh Lord, you have searched me and known me. You know when I sit down and when I rise up. You perceive my thoughts from afar. You discern my going out and my lying down. You're familiar with all my ways. Before a word is on my tongue, you know it completely. Oh Lord," literally Yahweh, Jehovah, "you hem me in, behind and before. You've laid your hand upon me. Such knowledge is too wonderful for me. It's too lofty for me to attain." Now, pull out a pen if you have it. Do a little Bible study here. I want you to just see how many words talk about how deeply, intimately God knows all your actions, all your thoughts, all your motives. Just as we start line 1, circle the word searched. Then the next one, circle the word know me. Then circle the word know on the first line. Go to line 2, perceive, circle that. Go to the next line, discern, circle that. And then go to the end, He's familiar, circle that. To the next line you go, it says you know it completely, circle you know. To the next line, you hem me in. It's a picture of God's before, He's behind you. And then put a line under, laid your hand upon me. This word is used for God when He puts His hand of favor upon someone. What He says in this passage, and by the way, the word know here is not a word of intellectual cognitive knowledge. It's not a factual knowledge like there's this deist, impersonal God who knows all things and there's this huge database someplace and He knows everything about every person. That's not the picture. This is the picture of a very personal covenant God. And He uses it's a literary term called a merism. When I sit down, when I rise up, that's all your activities. All of your thoughts, all of your motives. He gives you this picture from beginning when you get up to when you go to bed. When you have a thought that's germinating, even before it comes out of your mouth, He knows it. Now think of this. God personally, intimately knows every thought, every action, every dream. He knows your past. He knows what frustrates you. He knows where you're most tempted. He knows where you're vulnerable. He knows the private thoughts that not even your best friend or your mate has ever heard. He knows your deepest fears. He knows you more than you know yourself. So here's the application. You are understood by God. What you do, why you do it, when you do it, how you do it, what you currently are frustrated by, what makes you crazy, the past that has your regrets, the fears that dominate your future, He completely knows you. And here's the thing, He understands. See, sometimes we feel like a nobody, and what we don't understand is God has a really big agenda. And some of the dreams and some of the expectations, some of the times when you feel the most like a nobody, God is doing some of His deepest work. When you feel that, I have to tell you, during those 2 years, I talked to God a lot. I talked to God a lot about this and about that and how come about this and this is what I really want. And what was happening is He was weaning me from my personal agendas and my stuff and my arrogance and my pride that this will make me a someone. That I can't be in this little church. I got to be in a big church. This little town, I need to be in a big town. And what He was doing was saying, you know, Chip, until you get to the point where you understand this journey really isn't about you and your agenda and what you think will make you a someone, until you begin to understand that because I made you, you're already a someone. And what I want to do is I'm glad to give you some of the desires of your heart, but the calling that God has on your life requires a character that needs to be developed. And some of the most frustrating times that you have that you're pushing up against and you're frustrated by, and you have this imaginary thought that if I could get that, or if I could achieve that, or if I could finally get married, or if our marriage would get over the hump, or if we could finally have kids, or if we could, and we have the if then. Well, just look in the rearview mirror. How many of the old, if I had this, then, wow, everything would be great. Did that work? Or do you just change the if then, right? See, God wants you to know, here's the thing. You can talk to him in a different way. He understands. But that line, here's his desire. He has his hand upon you. Believe me, he wants far better for you than you want for you. He understands what you need. You think and I think this would make me happy. This would make me fulfilled. This is what I really need. Wait a second. God knows all things about you, but he knows all things about all things and all people. He sees the beginning from the end. He's all-knowing. He's outside of time. He's omnipresent. He's all-powerful. And you're his child. He understands. And so David's response is literally this phrase, it's too wonderful. Literally, it's too overwhelming. It's just too overwhelming. It's too extraordinary. And on the one hand, it's like, it's awesome and it's wonderful, but two things kind of happen. It's great to be understood, but the moment you think someone sees everything, the other response is, I'm not sure I want to be around that person because it's very revealing. And so David's reaction first is it's wonderful, and then he realizes, you know something, there's part of our humanness, I want to run away from God. Now, I don't know about you, but you probably think pastors get up every day and go, oh man, I just love the Bible, I love God, I just, Chip, he probably memorizes 5 verses in the morning just for breakfast, and, prays for a couple hours a day, never has any problems, and I don't know about you, there's times, I kind of have a little quick prayer time, and I sense the need to talk a little bit more deeper, and I just go, I don't want to talk to God. I don't want to read the Bible. In fact, there's times where don't take this personally, I don't want to be around other Christians. When I'm dealing with something, and sometimes I'm not even sure what I'm dealing with, but sometimes it's a little unforgiving spirit, or sometimes it's an attitude, or sometimes I'm frustrated with something or someone, here's what I know. If I really sit down and have a long talk with God, he's probably going to get there with me. And isn't that true of all of us? People that you maybe have a little issue with, I don't know about you, I don't want to hang around with them then. And so David goes from, it's wonderful that I'm understood and you know everything, but even if you're for me, I'm not ready to handle this. So the temptation is to run away from God. The temptation is, I'll dig my own well. I'll make my own way. I know what's better for me. And so David says, not only does God know you, God is pursuing you. Because in our humanness, we do run away. That's our human reaction. He says, where can I go from your spirit? Where can I flee from your presence? And then he gives these sort of hypothetical, the height and depth and length and breadth. He goes, if I go to heaven, you're there. If I make my bed in the depths, you are there. If I rise on the wings of the dawn, if I settle on the far side of the sea, even there, then notice the grace. Your hand will guide me. God wants to give you direction even when you don't want it. Your right hand will hold fast of me. If I say, surely the darkness will hide me and the light will become night around me. See, those are times, have you ever had one of those? The darkness will hide me. I think the Robin Williams and the super depressed people at times, the darkness just covers you up. I am a nobody. There's no use. Why should I live? It doesn't work. This marriage will never work. These kids are a disaster. My singleness is making me crazy. This job is dead end. I've lost my house. Forget the retirement. I was going to retire, and then there was a .com, then the dot bust, and I'm making like 1% on my investments. I've extended my retirement 5 years and 10 years, and nothing matters. When the darkness starts to overcome you, notice what he says. And even the light, the things you thought were going to be good, becomes darkness. He goes, for darkness is as light to you. And again, he uses this grammatical picture. He says, there's part of me in my humanness knowing that you know everything about me. I want to run away, but if I went as high as heaven, you're there. If I went, the depths, literally, the Hebrew word is in Shoel, the innermost part of the earth, you were there. If I went on the wings of dawn, farthest east, farthest west, you're there. And basically what he says is God doesn't just know us and understand everything. He's pursuing us, but why? Because he wants to guide you. Your hand will guide me. And then that picture, isn't it a great picture? Your right hand will take hold of me. This is, if you walk out a little bit later, you'll see moms and dads and some grandparents with toddlers. And what do? They have their little right hand, right? And they walk with them because they want to make sure that they're going to be okay. And God says, that's what I want to do with you. I want you to know that I understand your frustration. I hear, I know, but I'm pursuing you. And write this down. You're wanted by God. See, we get really feeling bad because we feel at times that no one really wants me. Maybe they want my money, or maybe they like me for my looks, or maybe they like me because I can produce stuff. But who really cares about me? Just me. Not what I can do, not how I perform, not how I look, not what I have, not where I live, not my zip code. Who would really care about me? When you start feeling like a nobody, you can be super successful out there, but what you feel like is, yeah, you get used, and they like what you can do. You know what God says? He goes, I want you. I'm pursuing you. In fact, so much of Jesus' life models and pictures this. There was a time when the disciples were walking across a unique place, and they were going through a little part of the land called Samaria, and culturally, Samaritans and Jews were in great hostility toward one another, and the disciples had gone into town to get some food, and Jesus, being fully man but being fully human, was very tired, and he sat down near this well. And a woman came out to get water, and she came out at this time rather than the normal time because she had a checkered past. She had been married 5 times and was currently living with a man. Now, I don't know what culture you're from, but that's not like a good track record in any culture. And she felt like a nobody. And so she came out in a conversation, and first of all, a man speaking to a woman. Wow, that's odd. A Jew speaking to a Samaritan, that's really odd. In other words, she knew in those cultures, I don't measure up. And Jesus turns to her, he said, if you knew who I was, you would ask of me, and I would give you living water, eternal life, so you wouldn't have to come back here. He didn't say, if you knew who I was, you better go clean up your act tomorrow, honey. It's not the message. See, she was running away from God, and then the conversation gets spiritual there. It's in John chapter 4, and she goes, well, you Jews say we're to worship on this mountain. We say this, and then there's this amazing moment where Jesus cuts through it all. And he says, the Father, forget the mountains, forget religion. The Father is seeking, and the word in Greek is pursuing, running after. It's where I think the classic author got that poem of The Hound of Heaven. The Father is seeking or pursuing those who would worship him in spirit and truth. See, God's pursuing you. He's after you. But he's after you to give you direction that's best for you. He's after you because he wants to forgive you and realign you and let you know that he does have a plan, and it is a great plan. It might be different than yours.